Dad's hands trembled as he counted the same stack of crumpled bills for the third time. The bills looked like they'd been rescued from the bottom of a washing machine, limp, faded, and pitifully few. 8,000, he muttered, flattening a torn 20 with shaking fingers. We need 8,000 by the end of the month. The number hit harder than I expected. I knew things were bad. I'd heard the whispered arguments, seen the unopened mail, but hearing it aloud made it real. 8,000 might as well have been 8 million for us. Mom sat at the kitchen table staring out the window at our frostbitten fields. She didn't speak, just rubbed her hands, swollen and aching from arthritis, as if the motion alone could keep her from falling apart. What happens if we don't get it? I asked, even though I already knew. Dad didn't look up. We lose the farm, the house, everything. The air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were listening. Upstairs, my little sister Maddie slept soundly, dreaming in a world where the bank couldn't take your home away. I envied her for that. I'll find work, I said finally. Something that pays enough. Dad just shook his head. Caleb, there's nothing around here that pays enough to make a difference. But I couldn't stand there and watch him count failure in small, wrinkled bills. So the next morning, I took our beat-up pickup into town. The engine coughed like an old smoker, and the brakes protested at every stop. I hit every store on Main Street. The diner. The auto shop. The feed store. Each time I got the same tired smile and the same word, sorry. By noon, I was ready to give up until I saw the sign outside Morrison's Hardware, a torn piece of cardboard nailed to the bulletin board. Farm help wanted. Good pay. Serious inquiries only. Perry Farm, Route 47. I stared at the name. People in town whispered about it like they whispered about ghosts or old graves. Quiet, careful, and never for long. Good pay or not, something in my gut told me this job would cost me more than I could afford. Still, we needed $8,000, so I tore the sign down. The drive to Perry Farm took 20 minutes, but it felt longer. The morning fog clung to the windshield like smoke, and the gravel road rattled through my chest. When I finally turned down the lane marked by 2 leaning fence posts and a sign that read Perry Farm in faded paint, I felt something shift inside me, a stillness like the world had stopped breathing. The land stretched out on both sides, acres of wild grass, tangled weeds, and old sagging fences that looked forgotten by time. Not a single crop grew there. No cows, no tractors, no sound except the wind sighing through the brush. The farmhouse appeared at the end of the road, white paint peeling around green shutters, its porch wrapped like a jawline smile that had seen too much. Behind it loomed a red barn, big enough to swallow a house whole. I parked by the barn and stepped out. The silence was thick. Then a voice broke it. You hear about the job? I turned. A tall man emerged from the barn doorway, his frame backlit by the dim morning light. Mid-50s, maybe older. His hair was iron gray, his eyes an unnatural pale blue, so pale they almost looked colorless. Yes, sir, I said. Caleb Maldonado. He nodded once. Samuel Perry. No handshake, no smile, just that measured stare that made you feel like you were being weighed. You ever done farm work? He asked. Yes, sir. My family's got a small place up near Ash Hollow. He studied me, then said, this job's different. The work isn't hard, but the rules are. Rules? He raised a hand, counting on his fingers as he spoke. First, you arrive at exactly 5 a.m. Not early, not late. Second, you work alone. Don't talk to anyone else on this land unless I introduce them. Third, stay away from the farmhouse. No reason to go near it. Fourth, bring your own food and water. Don't ask for anything from the house. Fifth, when the day's done, leave when I tell you. Don't linger. Don't ask questions. He paused then, his eyes narrowing. And if you see the old man in overalls, ignore him. Pretend he isn't there. The way he said it made the cold crawl up my spine. I can follow rules, I said quietly. Then be here tomorrow, Samuel said. 5 a.m. sharp. And just like that, he turned and vanished into the barn's shadow. The next morning, I pulled up to Perry Farm at exactly 5 a.m. The truck's headlights sliced through a wall of fog that clung low over the ground. The farmhouse was dark, no light in its windows. But Samuel Perry was already waiting, standing motionless by the barn door, hands in his coat pockets like he hadn't moved all night. You're on time, he said. Good. His voice carried strangely in the mist, soft but sharp. He led me into the barn. The air inside was cold and thick with the smell of hay, manure, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet like rusted tools or dried blood. Start with the stalls, he said, pointing toward a shovel and wheelbarrow. 6 of them. Clean out the old hay, spread fresh from the loft. After that, fix the fence posts along the north pasture. Don't rush, just do it right. I nodded, and he left without another word. The sound of his footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the echo of breathing animals that weren't there. I worked in silence, the scrape of my shovel against wood the only sound. Every few minutes I glanced toward the open barn doors, expecting to see someone or something standing there. By mid-morning, I finished the stalls and climbed the ladder to the loft. The hay up there was old, dry, and brittle. As I forked it down, a low creak came from the far end of the barn. I froze. "Samuel?" I called. No answer. I peered through the slats and saw movement. A figure outside, slow and deliberate, walking along the fence line. An old man, hunched and thin, wearing faded overalls and a wide straw hat. The fifth rule hit me like a nail to the chest. If you see the old man, ignore him. He turned his head toward the barn, and even from a distance I could feel it, the weight of his stare. My throat went dry. I went back to work, forcing the shovel through the hay, pretending he wasn't there. When I finally dared to look again, he was gone. That night, when I handed Samuel the tools, he nodded once. "Good work," he said. "See you tomorrow, 5 a.m. I drove home with the windows down, the cold air biting my face, trying to shake the feeling that someone had followed me out of that fog. By the second morning, the fog had thickened so much it felt alive. It clung to my clothes and crawled across the ground in slow, pulsing waves. When I pulled up to the barn, Samuel was there again, standing in the same exact place as yesterday, his posture identical. "You're on time," he said. "That matters here." He handed me a coil of rope and a set of tools. "North fence again." Some of the posts came loose overnight. I didn't ask how they could have. The wood was new. I'd replaced half of it myself just the day before, but I remembered his warning. No questions. I worked the morning away. The wind carried strange sounds through the fields, low hums that almost formed words. Once, I thought I heard someone whisper my name. I looked up fast, but no one was there. At noon, I took my lunch out by the fence. The fog had finally started to lift, revealing the far edges of the property. That's when I saw movement near the tree line, a figure again, smaller this time. I squinted, thinking it was Samuel, but the shape was wrong. Too thin, too jerky. It stood there watching me, half hidden by the brush. Then, before I could breathe, it vanished, like it had stepped backward into the mist itself. I dropped my sandwich and stood. "Hello!" My voice came out too loud. The silence that followed was worse than any answer. When I returned to the barn, Samuel was waiting by the door. He looked at the rope in my hands, then at me. "See anything strange?" he asked. I hesitated. "No, sir." "Just fog." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Good. Best to keep your eyes on your work. That's how you stay safe here." That night, as I drove home, my headlights caught something in the rearview mirror, a pale shape standing at the bend of Route 47, just standing. When I blinked, it was gone. But I could still feel those eyes, the same empty, colorless stare I'd seen on the man in overalls, following me all the way home. By the third morning, I was beginning to understand what Samuel meant when he said, "The job wasn't hard, just particular." Everything about the farm felt staged. The same silence, the same mist, the same faint smell of rot that clung to the air like damp wool. I arrived at exactly 5 a.m. again. Samuel met me without speaking, handed me a list, and disappeared toward the fields. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't want to know. The barn was darker that day, the sunlight barely piercing through cracks in the boards. As I shoveled hay into the stalls, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the dust along the floorboards. Bare feet. Small. I told myself they were old, maybe from animals, though deep down I knew better. They looked fresh. Around midday, as I climbed to the loft for fresh hay, I heard it. The slow creak of wood above me, deliberate and heavy. Footsteps. "Samuel?" I called out. No answer. The sound stopped. I climbed another step, my hands slick with sweat, then froze. From the shadowed corner of the loft, hay began to stir. A faint whisper drifted down, like breath pushed through dry straw. "Caleb!" My stomach dropped. I gripped the ladder tight, staring up into the gloom. Then, just for a second, I saw him. The old man in overalls, standing in the hay, his face pale and soft like wax. His eyes were black pits, bottomless. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. Every instinct screamed to look away, to remember the rule, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Not yours, not yet." The hay around him rippled as if something crawled beneath it. Then he was gone. I scrambled down the ladder, heart hammering, nearly tripping over the shovel. When I stepped outside, Samuel was there, standing exactly where I'd seen the figure vanish, his pale blue eyes locked onto mine. "You looked, didn't you?" he asked quietly. My throat felt tight. I heard something," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "If you want to keep earning, Caleb, you follow the rules. Everyone." Then he turned back toward the farmhouse, his voice low but sharp. "Next time, don't answer when something calls your name." By the fourth morning, sleep had become impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old man's face rising out of the hay, pale, empty, unblinking. His whisper still rang in my head like a tune I couldn't shake. When I reached Perry Farm, the fog was gone, but the stillness remained. Even the birds avoided this place. Samuel gave no greeting. He only handed me a hammer and a bucket of nails and said, "You'll mend the west fence today. Stay out of the corn." The way he said it made my skin prickle. There shouldn't have been corn at all. The fields had been barren for years. But when I walked west, I saw them, endless rows of tall, dead stalks rattling softly in the wind. They were brittle, colorless things, half rotted and yet still standing upright, like skeletal sentinels guarding something unseen. I began hammering the new posts into the ground, the metallic clang echoing in the emptiness. After a while, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Something slipped between the rows, quick, fluid, almost human. I dropped the hammer and turned, scanning the field. "Samuel?" I called. Nothing. The rustling stopped, replaced by a faint, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps pacing between the stalks. I held my breath. Then came a whisper carried on the wind. "Leave before the roots take you." My blood turned to ice. I'd backed away from the field, slow and careful. The whisper came again, softer now. "He can't keep them buried." I stumbled back toward the barn, refusing to look behind me. When I reached the open doors, I froze. Someone or something was knocking from inside the barn wall. 3 slow, heavy knocks, then silence. I forced myself to go in. The air was thick with dust. I followed the sound to the far stall. The boards were bowed outward, splintered in places, like something had been trying to push through. That's when Samuel appeared behind me. "Curiosity kills here, Caleb," he said softly. His shadow stretched long across the dirt floor. "You hear something, you walk away. You understand?" I nodded, heart pounding. He smiled faintly. "Good. Because some doors don't open from this side." By the 5th morning, I'd memorized the sound of that gravel road, each crunch under the tires like a heartbeat counting down. I told myself I wasn't afraid, just tired. But when the farmhouse came into view, every instinct in me screamed to turn back. Samuel waited near the barn, same as always, his hands tucked behind his back. The man never seemed to sleep. "You're early," he said, glancing at his watch. "Don't be." He turned and walked toward the tool shed. "You'll work the south lot today. Some soil needs turning." I didn't ask why. But as I passed the farmhouse, I caught something in one of the upper windows, a flicker of movement like a curtain shifting even though no wind stirred. I slowed. There it was again, a shadow crossing behind the glass, long and thin. Rule 3 echoed in my head, "Stay away from the farmhouse." But curiosity gnawed at me like hunger. At noon, I sat near the porch steps, pretending to eat my lunch. The air around the house was colder, heavy, and full of the faint scent of rot, the same metallic sweet stench I'd smelled in the barn. Then, from inside, came a soft sound, crying. A woman's voice, low and broken. It rose and fell, muffled, as though coming from behind walls too thick to escape. I stood slowly. "Hello?" The crying stopped. The next sound was faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming toward the front door from within. I took a step back. The door handle began to turn. That's when Samuel's voice cut through the still air. "I told you to stay away from the house." I spun around. He was standing at the edge of the porch, face unreadable. You heard nothing," he snapped. "That house doesn't belong to the living." His gaze softened just enough for pity. "You've done good work, Caleb. Don't let curiosity ruin you." I nodded, shame burning hot in my chest. As I walked away, I glanced back once more. The curtain in the upstairs window had been pulled aside. A pale hand rested against the glass, and it was waving. By the 6th morning, the sky over Perry Farm looked bruised. The sun barely pushed through the clouds, and everything, the house, the fields, even the air, carried that strange copper smell again. I told myself it was fertilizer, though Samuel never seemed to use any. He sent me to the barn without a word. The silence felt heavier that day. I started sweeping near the tool bench, trying to ignore the faint feeling that something below the floor was moving. By mid-morning, the boards began to creak, not from my weight, deeper, slower, like someone walking underneath. I crouched, pressing my ear against the wood. For a moment, I heard nothing. Then came a whisper, soft and wet, like a voice bubbling up through mud. "Help us!" My blood went cold. I jerked back and nearly dropped the broom. I stood perfectly still, listening. The whisper came again, this time clearer. "He feeds us to the roots." I stumbled outside for air. The wind carried the scent of smoke, though there was no fire. The cornfield swayed even without a breeze, the stalks bending as if something beneath them breathed. Samuel appeared behind me so suddenly I almost shouted. "You're pale," he said. "Feeling unwell?" I nodded too quickly. "Just dizzy. Thought I heard something in the barn." He studied me a long moment, those pale blue eyes unblinking. "You didn't hear anything. You understand?" "Yes, sir." He leaned in slightly, voice low. The ones before you stopped listening. He turned and walked away, heading toward the farmhouse. I noticed then his boots left no footprints in the dirt. I waited until he disappeared inside, then crept back toward the barn. My hands trembled as I pried up one of the loose boards near the center aisle. Beneath it was black soil, wet and glistening, and the faintest movement like worms twisting beneath the surface. Then something pale surfaced, a finger. Human. I dropped the board, heart pounding, and backed away. When I looked toward the open door, the old man in overalls stood just outside, motionless. He raised one dirt-covered hand and pressed it to his lips. Shh! That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard that whisper again. He feeds us to the roots. The words crawled through my mind until I couldn't tell if they were memory or dream. At dawn, I drove back to Perry Farm with a knot in my stomach. The fog was thicker than ever, turning the world to milk. When I stepped out of the truck, the ground squelched underfoot. Wet. Softer than it should have been. Samuel wasn't waiting by the barn this time. For the first time since I'd started, he was nowhere to be seen. The farmhouse windows were dark. I told myself it was fine. Maybe he'd gone into town, but the silence around that house felt wrong, like the air was holding its breath. I decided to work anyway, anything to stay busy. Near the back of the barn, behind some feed sacks, I noticed a trap door half buried in straw. It wasn't on any of Samuel's lists. The edges were rimmed with iron and stained dark. A chain held it shut. Every part of me said to leave it alone, but the whisper from below the floorboards wouldn't leave my head. I found a crowbar and pried the chain loose. The hinges groaned as the trap door opened. A wave of cold air rushed up, damp and earthy, but underneath it was something foul. A ladder descended into blackness. I switched on my flashlight and climbed down. The cellar walls were dirt-packed with old timber beams. The deeper I went, the more I saw. Things half buried in the soil. Boots, rags, bones. At the far end of the tunnel, I found wooden crates stacked neatly, each marked with a number. The boards were sealed, but one had cracked open. Inside was something wrapped in burlap. When I peeled it back, I saw a face. A man's face, gray, dried, the skin pulled tight like parchment. The eyes were gone, sockets filled with black roots that pulsed faintly in the beam of my flashlight. I stumbled back, gasping. The roots crawled toward the dirt floor, writhing like they were alive. Then I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate. And Samuel's voice drifted down, calm and cold. You weren't supposed to find that. Samuel's voice froze me where I stood. His footsteps echoed above the cellar door, steady and patient, like someone who'd waited years for this moment. Curiosity, he said, his tone almost kind. That's always the one that kills them. The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging the cellar into blackness. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied, throwing shaky light across the dirt walls. The roots that covered the crates had started moving, reaching toward me like fingers hungry for warmth. I grabbed the ladder and tried to climb, but the rungs were slick with mud. No, not mud, something thicker. It clung to my hands and dripped down my arms, smelling of copper and rot. I forced myself up one rung, then another. The wood groaned. From the corner of my eye, I saw something stir among the buried bodies, a face turning toward me, its mouth opening in a voiceless scream. Help us, it whispered again, the same voice I'd heard from the barn. He feeds the roots with us. The beam of my flashlight caught movement above, the trapdoor lifting. Light spilled down and Samuel's silhouette filled the frame. You should have kept to your chores, he said. His voice echoed, strangely layered, human and not. The roots lashed upward, wrapping around my legs. I kicked and pulled, my heart hammering as I reached the top rung. I shoved the trapdoor with my shoulder. It didn't budge. Then, suddenly, the wood gave way. I rolled onto the barn floor, gasping, covered in dirt and the stench of decay. The light outside had changed. Everything glowed with an orange haze, like sunset trapped in smoke. Samuel stood in the doorway, eyes pale and gleaming. You think you can leave? I stumbled backward toward the open field. The ground trembled underfoot. The corn swayed violently, bending toward me, and I realized the roots beneath the soil were spreading, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Samuel raised one hand. The roots obeyed. They need feeding, he said softly, and you came hungry. I ran. The barn behind me cracked and collapsed inward, as if the earth itself swallowed it whole. When I reached my truck, I didn't look back, but in the rearview mirror I saw Samuel standing in the field, unmoving, the soil around him alive and breathing. I didn't stop driving until the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the world in blood orange and purple. My knuckles were white on the wheel, my chest aching from every breath. Behind me, the gravel road stretched endlessly, but I could still feel it, the pulse of the farm, alive and watching. The truck rattled over potholes and loose rocks, tires kicking up clouds of dust that clung like cobwebs. I dared not look in the rearview mirror, but the faintest movement haunted the edge of my vision. Something pale, unmoving, standing where it shouldn't be. When I finally reached home, the familiar sight of my small farmhouse should have brought relief. It didn't. The air smelled wrong, heavy with the copper tang I'd smelled at Perry Farm. Maddie's room was dark. Mom and Dad were still at work, unaware of how close I had come to, something I couldn't even name. I tried to convince myself it was over. Samuel Perry, the cellar, the roots, all gone. But that night, the whispers began, faint at first, coming through the floorboards of my bedroom. We're still hungry. I sat up, heart hammering. The sheets felt wet against my skin, though I hadn't moved from the bed. The whispers grew louder. He feeds the roots. He waits. I ran downstairs, flipping lights on. Nothing. Just the familiar scent of old wood and Mom's cooking fading from the kitchen. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The yard was empty, yet the wind carried the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the grass, circling the house. Then I saw it. At the edge of the tree line behind our garage, a pale figure, thin and tall, watching. Its eyes were black hollows, yet I felt it stare in my bones. I slammed the door and locked it, shaking. I could hear the scratching at the windows, soft at first, then louder, as if the soil itself was trying to crawl into my house. I tried to call the police, but the line was dead. Cell service was gone. Even my dog cowered in the corner, fur bristling, refusing to meet the thing's gaze. I realized then, whatever Samuel was, whatever fed in those fields, it hadn't stayed behind at Perry Farm. It followed. And now it had me. The night pressed close, thick with rustling leaves and whispering voices that seeped through every crack. Sleep was impossible. Tomorrow, whatever it held, would be worse. The next morning, the fog rolled in again, thick and suffocating, curling around the trees and clinging to the fields like smoke. I couldn't stay inside any longer. If I didn't face what was following me, I feared it would consume me in my sleep. I stepped onto the porch, breath steaming in the cold, and scanned the yard. Everything looked normal, the lawn overgrown, the swing hanging crooked from the frame, but I could feel it watching. That same pulse I'd felt at Perry Farm, low and insistent, thrumming through the earth. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the edge of the yard, moving carefully, every sense alert. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the fog, tall, unnaturally thin, pale as moonlight, with empty black eyes that seemed to pierce straight into me. The overalls, the hat, the same figure from Perry Farm, the old man. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt like lead. Then it moved, slowly, deliberately, gliding through the fog toward me. I swung the flashlight, but the beam did nothing. It didn't reflect off the figure, didn't illuminate it. I stumbled backward. "Stay back!" I shouted. The fog thickened, pressing in on me, carrying that coppery metallic smell. I could hear whispers now, rising from the ground around my feet. "He feeds, we feed, hungry." I ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots seemed to grasp at my ankles as if the earth itself wanted to stop me. The figure followed silently, unhindered, gliding over the grass without leaving a mark. I reached the driveway, panting, chest heaving. My truck was there, thankfully unlocked, and I slammed the door, starting the engine. But in the rearview mirror, I saw the figure again, standing in the middle of the yard, staring at me, utterly still, eyes empty yet full of hunger. As I drove down the road, the fog clung to the headlights, the shape always just beyond the light. And through the engine hum and tires on gravel, I could hear it, the soft, wet whisper that would haunt me forever. He feeds the roots, and soon you will too. I drove faster, my knuckles white, until the edges of the fog began to thin. But deep down, I knew the farm's reach wasn't just a place. It was something that could follow, and it had chosen me. That night, I couldn't wait until sunrise. Every shadow in the house seemed to move, and the whispers came again, louder this time, crawling through the walls. He feeds the roots. He feeds the roots. I knew I couldn't stay inside. The rules Samuel had forced me to follow had kept me alive so far, but I also knew he had underestimated me. Something inside me snapped. The fear, the desperation, the anger. I had to confront it before it took everything. I grabbed a flashlight, a hammer, and a length of chain from the garage. Outside, the fog had returned, curling along the ground like living smoke. I moved toward the woods behind the yard, toward the place where the whispers were strongest. Every step I took, the roots beneath the ground seemed to pulse, writhing like snakes, reaching for my ankles. Then I saw him. The old man in overalls, pale and thin, standing in the mist. His black eyes seemed to pull the fog toward him. I could hear the faint sound of movement beneath the ground, the roots stirring, alive, hungry. I remembered the rules. Ignore him. But I couldn't. I swung the chain in front of me and shouted, "I will be your next!" The figure didn't move, didn't respond, but the ground trembled. From the fog, shapes began to emerge, shadows, human forms twisted and partially buried in the earth, faces pale, hollow, mouths opening in silent screams. I ran toward the barn, the flashlight swinging wildly. The whispers became a roar, drowning out the night. Feed, feed, feed! When I reached the barn, I found Samuel waiting, pale blue eyes gleaming in the dark. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. His voice carried over the chaos, calm and commanding. The roots lashed outward from the ground, thick as snakes grabbing at my legs. I fought them off with the hammer, but they were endless. The buried forms surged, climbing toward me, desperate and screaming. "Follow the rules!" Samuel shouted. But it was too late. The farm was alive now, feeding, expanding, pulling at everything in its reach. I had broken the safety net, and now I had to fight to survive without it. Somehow, I forced myself into the truck, slamming the door and flooring it. The roots struck at the tires, snapping against the metal, but the engine roared to life. Behind me, the barn, the farmhouse, and the field seemed to pulse as one organism, alive, hungry, and infinite. I knew I couldn't go back. I floored the truck, tires skidding over the gravel as the roots and shadows surged behind me. The fog clung to the headlights, twisting and writhing like living smoke, hiding the farm in a haze that seemed to breathe and pulse. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to look back, but I forced my eyes forward. The whispering followed me, relentless, carried on the wind. He feeds, he comes. Branches clawed at the windshield as I tore down the narrow lane, the truck bouncing over potholes and loose stones. The old man's figure emerged from the fog again, gliding in place, watching, unmoving, black eyes fixed on me. The roots struck at the edges of the road, cracking the gravel, slapping against the tires, but I didn't slow. My hands were slick with sweat, gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles burned. I could feel the earth beneath the truck trembling, alive, pulsing as though it knew I was escaping and was angry. Halfway down the road, the fog thickened, and I saw them, shadows moving through the trees, figures crawling from the soil itself, reaching toward me with pale, twisted limbs. I swerved, narrowly missing a mass of writhing roots that shot across the road. The tires skidded, gravel flying, and then Samuel's voice, calm and low, echoed over the roar of the engine. "You can run, Caleb, but some things never leave the soil." The road finally leveled, and the fog began to thin. The figures receded into the mist, but I could feel their presence lingering, clinging to the tires, the truck, my clothes, my skin. My chest heaved and my stomach churned with fear and relief. I had escaped, at least for now. Hours later, I reached the highway, the fog breaking entirely. The familiar lines of the asphalt felt unreal after the nightmare stretch behind me. I dared to look in the rearview mirror and saw nothing. No roots, no shadows, no old man, just the quiet hills of Kentucky, peaceful and normal. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it under my skin, crawling through the back of my mind. The farm had followed me this far, and it would follow further. I drove faster, putting distance between myself and that cursed place. But deep down, I knew some rules once broken never truly let you go. Days passed, but sleep remained impossible. I tried to convince myself that Perry Farm was behind me, that the roots, the whispers, the old man were all confined to that cursed place. But every night I felt the pulse beneath the ground, faint but insistent, as if the earth itself had memorized me. I returned home, but things felt different. The air smelled faintly of copper and decay, and the soil around the yard seemed wrong. Soft in places where it had been hard, almost alive. Maddie played in the grass, laughing, unaware, but I noticed how the dirt shifted slightly under her tiny feet. I avoided the fields, but the whispers came anyway. Faint, wet, dripping into my ears like water through a sieve. He feeds, he watches, he waits. One night I went to check the basement just to make sure everything was normal. The boards beneath my feet creaked, my flashlight flickered, and I saw it. Thin, black roots threading through the cracks in the concrete floor. Small, delicate, alive. They weren't reaching for me yet, but they were moving, growing, spreading. I realized then that the farm hadn't been just a place. It was a presence, and it had followed me home. The rules Samuel gave me hadn't been about obedience. They had been about survival, about staying alive long enough to understand that some things can't be outrun. I looked out the window at the fields behind our house. The moonlight glinted off something long and thin crawling through the grass. A figure or roots mimicking one. My stomach dropped. I wanted to leave again, but I couldn't. Maddie and my parents depended on me, and running wouldn't stop the hunger. The roots didn't care about distance. They only needed me to remember, to feed them somehow. I understood, finally, the terrible truth. Some places, some rules are never gone. They just wait, quietly, beneath the soil, in the shadows, in the fog, until they are ready again. I sit now by the window at night, flashlight beside me, listening to the soft pulse beneath the earth. It's always there, waiting, watching, and I know one day it will come fully awake. Until then, I follow the rules I didn't break, and I hope it's enough, because the roots remain, and one day they will reach for everything.